Well, hello, and welcome to the Holmes Cinema Clues, Masks, Mirrors, and Media, a show where film, television, and theater become a lens for understanding neurodiversity. Here, we go beyond the screen to explore the characters who mask, mirror, and struggle to belong, often hiding in plain sight. Join our hosts Dan and Dr. Stephanie Holmes as we invite you to step into the role of cinema detective to examine how autism, ADHD, and other neurodivergent experiences are portrayed in the media. This isn't therapy. It's not diagnosis. Rather, it's thoughtful conversation mixed with cultural analysis for a deeper look inside the stories that shape how we see ourselves as well as one another. So, settle in, sharpen your lens, and get ready to follow the clues with your hosts, Dan and Dr. Stephanie Holmes. Are you ready? Let's begin.
He's gonna, give me some commendation or a promotion or something. Come to find out, he brought me in there to fire me.
Welcome back to Home Cinema Clues, where every story has a subtext, every character has a code, where some see a script, we see a pattern. I'm cinema agent Dr. Stephanie Holmes, autism researcher, autism specialist, neurodivergent ally. And what you just saw was a continuation of Richard Jewell. And joining me again is my cinema agent profiler, Dave Glick, where we're going to jump right in to finish this conversation, part two. So that scene, Dave, where you want to start us on our part two of our discussion of Richard Jewell?
Again, what you see is the lack of social skills, the lack of intuition, that clearly the college president was not very happy with him. He had no clue that he was getting people angry. Again, what we also see is that us neurodiverse folks, we can only see what's in front of us. We also often don't get the periphery of what's going on. And unfortunately, the peripheral issues don't have a rule book. They're unspoken things. So you see that there. I mean, in his mind, the president was calling him in to congratulate him for a job well done, and instead he was fired. When I worked in academia, that I got things done that people weren't able to get done for years. I was able to unstick projects that they just could not overcome. When I wrapped up it was during my internship, and I said, okay, I'm ready to come on full time and work. The answer was no. It's like, but look at everything I've gotten done for you. And they wouldn't say it bluntly or directly, which is very hard for me. They insinuated it that, well, yes, you did get great things done. You got everyone mad in the process. To which my response was, well, I went where other people failed. The only way to get it done was to get some people annoyed. And that was something that kind of followed me for a good chunk of my career when I worked for other people. And that's one of the reasons I went into private practice. That, clearly people want to hire me, not always so much as a therapist, but as much as a problem solver. And I'm very good at solving problems, getting things done, overcoming resistance. But in private practice, that's the expectation. A contract is written. We've agreed what the expectation is. We agreed what the payment will be. And most importantly, we agreed to when I'm going to leave. There has to be a set end date.
Right.
So that's how I overcame that. My obsessive compulsive traits, just as with Richard Jewell, to get something done. There's a saying, there's no better way to make enemies than to make progress. And it's a key thing to remember. I make a lot of progress, I'm going to have a lot of enemies. So I think it's something us neurodiverse folks have to remember. That you can be a woodpecker, or you could be a what's that little bird? Is it a hummingbird? The little bird that flies around in circles. Mm-hmm. You can be a woodpecker or a hummingbird. Now the woodpecker is amazing in a crisis. We see what's in front of us, we knock it out. But oftentimes employers want more of a hummingbird who can fly around many different things and understand these subtleties too. So again, what you're seeing is him not understanding the unspoken social contracts, basically. What are the social contracts of being a campus cop? What are the social contracts that are going on around me as well?
And that college students naturally are not going to like campus security.
Right.
They're not going to be like, oh, the campus security is here to protect and serve and do what's best. No, he's here to squash my fun and enforce rules I don't think should be rules, where he really does walk into, because I think it's really important when he's acting a little bit like a tough guy with the guys that were drinking. He's not really being an a-hole, which the lawyer told him not to be. It feels to me he like took on a cop persona a little bit as he's trying to be tough with these college guys, because that was obviously not him, but he wasn't really he wasn't abusing power. He was in his role, getting them to follow the rules, but it seemed like he was uncomfortable, and that really wasn't him. Like he was maybe either mimicking or masking when he was dealing with college students. What's your take on that?
I mean, he was doing his job. But you see, what he didn't get is that college presidents and people in authority, what they say in public is often very different from what they want in private. And that was a social skill that I didn't get till later in life. That what people say in public, what matters, I mean, it's what people say in public is important, but it's more important what they do in private. So I can think of many examples where I've seen people, police chiefs, mayors, department heads say something in public, but in private implement something very different. That's not something he was able to grasp either. Which is also because of the timing. If he were my patient, I mean, what very possibly could have happened to him if things were in a different era was, when he was at Habersham County. So I trained police all over the country, especially in the Southeast, is that there's a very strong possibility one of his comrades or a sergeant would have said, look, I just heard this guy, David Glick, speak and train. Why don't you go see him? Go call him, see what he could figure out. And I would sit in front of him and I would say, look, Richard, you have a condition called autism or neurodiversity. You're very high functioning, but we need to train you in the social skills and the unspoken rules of what's going on. And again, make the invisible visible and make something abstract concrete. There'd be no stopping him. But I didn't exist in 1990. There was no one really doing that in 1996.
Right, because the DSM-4, which would have introduced Asperger's syndrome into our language, didn't come out till 1994. This is happening at the 1996 Olympics. And anything that comes into the DSM, it can take up to 10 years to get from the research to the book, from the book to training. Because what if you were in school and you were trained on DSM-3? You didn't go back to school and get another master's so that you could. So then the retraining, retooling, clinicians, pediatricians, school psychologists. And it feels like by the time we got Asperger's syndrome or high functioning autism into the nomenclature, it's like, boom, here's DSM-5. And we're changing it again on supports and levels. And we don't use this terminology anymore. And so again, we got to retool, retrain, and it causes glitches in all kinds of systems of training and better understanding the autism spectrum.
Absolutely. And the DSM has changed direction on autism so many times. I mean, when I first entered the field, it was called pervasive developmental disorder, PDD. Then we went into autism, high functioning autism with that. I mean, there's been so much change in the DSM around this, it's hard to keep track of it for many. Like I said, it takes time for this to sink in to the field. But like I said, I'm convinced if it were a different time, one of the police would have attended my training. Go see Glick, see what he can figure out for you. But I think we could have.
Let's continue to make the case for Richard Jewell, because his passionate interest was definitely law and order, based on very important things to him to protect and serve. But if you haven't seen the movie, if you're not sure of the real life events, a bomb is planted at the 1996 Olympics. He was a hero. He was the security guard that noticed it because he was on it. I mean, he was constantly, even throughout the concert, telling people about things. And you see some of the cops like, oh, he's the rent-a-cop. He's a security guard, not taking him seriously. There's underage drinking, like whatever. And so, but he's on it. His pattern recognition, based on doing his job, following the rules, protect and serve. He notices it. And so at first he is a hero, and all the news, oh, he did this and whatever. And then kind of take us back to that. It's the college person that calls the tip line and says he's a zealot. And then what starts changing with how he's being treated, Dave?
Well, FBI was desperate to find out who did it. the agent who was portrayed by John Hamm, unfortunately, even though the FBI is very prestigious and I've done work for them, I've done work for the DEA, I've done work for the ATF. At the same time, sometimes the agents don't utilize all the resources they have. That the FBI at the time did have the behavior analysis unit. They did have tremendous resources, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to call them. That, for example, I was an embedded clinician with the DEA for nearly 20 years. And even though I was in place, it doesn't mean people are necessarily going to bring me in. Even though I think probably 30% of the time when I was brought into cases, the case agent was told to bring me in. There was a reluctance. But when the agent in charge saw how things were going, look, I'm telling you, I want Glick in on this now. Journal Glick in, bring him in here, get him on a plane, bring him out here. And then I uncover something they didn't see. So it's important to remember that just because the resources are there, it doesn't mean they're going to be utilized.
Right. Because what we see the agents seeing that he's gullible and naive and then using that against him because he wants to be a police officer. He so respects the FBI. So when they come in and do search and seizure and they're, removing all of this property, first they find what looks like an arsenal of weaponry, but in context, he was a hunter. In context, he hunt deer and live in the South. There's lots of weapons, so those things started to work against him, and him being so accommodating because you're an authority, you would never abuse your power. Sure, you can do this. Sure, I'll come make this training video. Sure, I'll tell you whatever without my lawyer representation. You wouldn't harm me because you're here to protect and serve. And they twist that. That was, I was getting so angry. I was getting so angry.
Idealized, especially the FBI. I'm not going to comment more on that, but when you idealize somebody or something, it doesn't lead to good things. It doesn't mean you can't respect someone, but you have to be aware that it's still flawed. He couldn't get that concept. Also, all the guns he had, the assault rifles, that sort of thing. For one, we're in Georgia, which he said, I live in Georgia, which for people watching in other parts of the country is very common. But also, it's very, very rare you don't see a cop or someone in the security field with not just their duty weapon, but a whole arsenal at home. It's part of the mentality as well. So that's actually.
We saw in the other clip even the game he was playing in the arcade, right? He was practicing shooting. He's going to the shooting range, to practice, even though he's not a cop yet or now. He's still acting as if he's preparing himself, for that track. I will tell you the most heartbreaking part of the movie where I actually cried is when they were calling him into questioning again, this time with his lawyer, and they're kind of coming at him. And as he leaves, he said something like, I thought the highest calling one could have would be to work for the FBI. And now I'm changing my opinion about that.
Right.
That watching someone's dream crash in front of them, that was heartbreaking because now he sees his naivety, his idealization of them has been used against him. And it took him that long. I think the investigation went on for months to see he was being played. And you could see in his face when he realized he had been played. That was heartbreaking.
Well, I think also part of being neurodiverse is this blind loyalty. We are very loyal people and we're loyal to a flaw. Now, I've worked with several Richard Jewells, especially, and where it was very successful was during most of my DEA years. That during my era, we had DEA leadership with a tremendous amount of wisdom. Wisdom is different than knowledge. Wisdom is different than being smart. Wisdom has, if you look it up in the dictionary, the definition of smart versus the definition of wisdom and definition of intelligence are different things. So wisdom involves using knowledge to make the world a better place and help people. So during many of my years, we had certain people who were certainly neurodiverse, who were part of the force. And the leadership was so wise. They said, look, okay, this person is odd, but we see tremendous skills as well. What position can we put them in that we can avoid the issue with the social skills, but allow them to be incredibly effective? And it was done beautifully. So it was very common they'd take jobs as code breakers. They would take a job, working with a linguist who would surveil cartel and Cartel Communications, who was speaking code, or had their own language or different words. Very, very effective. Evidence, crime scene investigation, incredibly useful, where they won't miss a single detail. So it doesn't always, I mean, there's plenty of jobs in law enforcement which are not public facing. And nobody really, a lot of the agents and task force officers and police don't want those jobs, but people who are neurodiverse do want them. So we often see people who are neurodiverse taking jobs neurotypicals don't want and doing it extremely well. You see, so again, he was a victim of the times he was in, his lack of knowledge of the field. See, it was a question of timing. And it's a shame he died such an early death, because if he were still alive now, we could be doing a lot of good. He'd be on here with us.
Right.
As well. I'm determined to get a meeting at some point with Lynn. It wasn't just the one attorney you saw portrayed. The other attorney was Lynn Wood. Lynn Wood was the one who took him to trial and won and sued the people. So at some point, I'm determined to get a meeting with Lynn Wood. He still lives in Atlanta. I think the other attorney does as well. So at some point, I'd love to sit down and speak to him as well. So I think that was a good too.
I think in mentioning the lawyer, it even kind of comes back this theme that we've been talking about social context, because once he's no longer working for the lawyer's firm and now he's been implicated in this, he goes back to that lawyer whom he has no relationship with, but like, you're the only lawyer that I know. You're the only person that was nice to me. So he kind of calls out of the blue, like, and it calls him my lawyer. He hasn't hired him. There's no contract. He's just like, I'm going to call my lawyer, and kind of expecting that he was going to step in and do that role for him just because that's what you do. You're a lawyer. Come lawyer me, essentially.
There's also a social class aspect to it. I mean, he came from a very humble background. There was no uncle who was an attorney. There was no, I mean, a lot of it depends on what your social network is and what you can access and what you know. That, he came from a humble background. I don't know whatever happened with his father. It was never mentioned in the film. But it was him and his mother against the world. But, I think it was his mother who gave him such unconditional love, who always backed him up. When he had his final press conference, when he was cleared by the Department of Justice, he said, "Thank you, Mama. Thank you for everything, Mama." And you couldn't have picked a better actress than Kathy Bates. I mean, you just can't.
Awesome.
Kathy, everything she touches is just so well done.
There's another scene as a mom that broke my heart, and that's when they realize that they're being bugged. They're being watched and they're bugged everywhere. And then mom turns on the television and it's a show with something exploding. He's like, "We can't watch that. We can't watch anything with bombs. We're being surveilled." And she cries and goes to the room, and then he has immediate remorse for raising his voice, at his mom, for so many reasons. And she finally opens the door and she says, "How can I protect you from those people?" And he said, "No, Mom, it's my job to protect." That was another, as a mom, when you see your child, you can't protect them. It's awful.
Like I said, I see parallels here to the film Shrek, but I also see a parallel to the book and film The Fountainhead. That this man had an idea that he won't engage in mediocrity, even if people try to destroy him. And that was the Fountainhead was about. And he just wasn't going to budge. And you can destroy me, put me in jail, do whatever you want. I'm not budging from that. So you see some of that with him also.
And this is also something, because this comes up in couples therapy all the time. There's also in this scene when the FBI is coming in and they're taking all the stuff and they're seizing all the property, and the lawyer's kind of giving them some guff, so to speak. And mom's like, "How can you still respect them? Look at what they're doing." And Richard's response is always, "Well, they're just doing their job. They're just following this procedure. They're just doing this." And they would say, "How can you defend them?" And he said, "I'm not defending, I'm explaining." And I see that in couples work all the time. Dan and I have this. We were on Jody Carlton's show and we were talking about, we were on a plane and I was so frustrated. I'm just not a fan of Delta, which is sad because I live in Atlanta. And so Delta is where you got to fly out of. And I'm not a fan. And so we're on. Okay. Delta. Dave loves Delta. Not me. I hate Delta Club. And Dan loves Delta because he's Diamond Dan and he's got all the perks. They treat Dan differently than they treat me, trust me. But we're on the plane. They deplane us because they forgot to do something. And so for like 3 minutes, Dan had some agitation and frustration with Delta. We did not even get off into the lounge again, where he's like, well, they were probably doing this and probably TSA and probably the procedure and blah, blah. And I was like, you couldn't stay frustrated with me for more than 3 minutes. And he's like, well, I was frustrated. And then when I realized the procedure and blah, 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 then it's just how it's got to be. And I was like, seriously? And that's kind of that same thing. I was laughing in the movie. We were talking about that. I was like, it feels like he's defending the organization. And that's how a neurotypical takes it. It feels like you're defending them in your explanation instead of being with me in this moment and this frustration that feels unfair.
Absolutely. No, I mean, that's part of who we are. Also, another thing is that as neurodiverse people, we often think it's a good, if we haven't had social skills training, we think it's a good idea to state the obvious. And, that's what he did. And he wasn't lying because it was the truth, but it can get us into trouble. But, we do see the blind loyalty to various objects or organizations or things as well.
Right. So as we're kind of looking at this case, we've made the case for routines, for the loyalty, for the passionate interest, for the social skills, lack of social context, eye contact. What are other important features in kind of going with this, the diagnosis, the case here? What are the other things? Do you feel like we hit all the criteria?
There's one thing we have to finish with is that I teach a class. It's the only class of its kind of my knowledge in the country. And to my knowledge, no one's tracking. I've trained more police in personality disorders than anyone else in America or maybe the world. No one's counting, but based on my research, that's the case. In the class, Advanced Psychology for Cops, which is about personality disorders, which, by the way, everyone thought police were too stupid to get the concept. I had to fight for it. And I've been doing it now for 20 years all over the country. Went even as far out as Alaska to do it. But what we're seeing is that it's important law enforcement can understand neurodiversity. For one, there was a thought that people who had neurodiversity weren't capable of criminal acts, which is false. The other bigger issue for police, I explained to them, it's a double-edged sword, is that people who are neurodiverse will often admit to crimes they didn't commit.
Yep.
Okay. In my 23 years in private practice, I've had 5 patients admit to crimes they didn't commit. And in fact, one of them got fired from a job for going through the dumpster. He would go through the dumpster. He worked at a store and they accused him of stealing because there was a certain packaging material that had a sensory benefit. You could squeeze it. It was very malleable. So he wanted those. And in his mind, if it's in the garbage, it's free reign. But the store said, that's our property. What's in the dumpster? You're stealing and we're firing you for that. And he admitted to things he didn't do. And we all said to him, why did you admit to that? Why to something you didn't do? Some things you didn't do. There were other things as well. And he said, I just wanted it to stop. I'd do anything to make that stop. So what we also see is the sensory inputs of being interrogated are significant. There's another, are significant. The other, and I don't know if I mentioned this already, if I did, stop me, is that many of the behaviors neurodiverse people exhibit, especially in terms of body language, come across as deception. But it's actually a sensory soothing behavior, like going like this, which indicates defensive behavior. For neurodiverse people, this is how we soothe ourselves. I feel very comfortable. I can sleep. If I sleep on a plane, I'm going to cross my arms, put my head down. I'm going to go right to sleep and stay that way. So I'm kind of keeping myself together. So I've been part of deception training with police work. I named Bo Cisco is who I follow. Does a great job. But a lot, turning your eyes to the side when asked a question, for a neurotypical, that may well be a deception behavior. But for someone who's neurodiverse, it's how we process information. So that's the key component, especially for any police who are watching this, that a neurodiverse person's body language needs to be interpreted differently than someone who's neurotypical.
Okay, so you've already given me an idea of what I want our next show to be, Profiler Dave. I would love for you to find some clips of people doing those things like crossing arms or pacing or looking to the side, and us talk about the difference between if a neurotypical person does that or a neurodivergent person does that, and how cops or clinicians or spouses or parents or teachers, how they interpret those behaviors, because you mentioned the fawning response. And so how that will come across in like couples therapy is, the wife will say, you did this because of this, admit this, you did this on purpose because blah, 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 blah. It's like, fine, I did that. It's to go away, stop the whatever. And then the next day they're having the conversation. He's like, well, no, I didn't do that. But you admitted to it. So are you lying now? Or are you lying then? Because yesterday you said you did this for this person. He's like, I wanted it to stop. But no, now that I'm not flooded and now that I'm more regulated, I'm saying, no, I didn't do it for that reason. Well, now you're being defensive. So these dynamics of being in a fawn response where the fight or flight and overwhelm happens and the person keeps pushing it. Tell me the reason. Tell me why. Why did you do that? You might get a false.
It registers what's known as a false positive.
Yeah.
It registers a false positive is the technical term. And like we said, I mean, the sensory inputs are going to make or break it. That if the sensory inputs are too extreme for us, we'll say or do anything to make it stop. But as a result, we can end up getting ourselves in more trouble.
Exactly, because then that turns into a false agreement. Well, you said you were going to take the child to do this. You said we could go on that vacation. You said you admitted to this thing. And then that creates all kinds of interpersonal dynamics, which we could do a whole nother show on that. Well, I want to thank you for being a part of this Richard Jewell. I think we can say case closed. I feel like we've solved the case of Richard Jewell, that he indeed was a victim of the times. We did not have accurate diagnosis criteria then. And what we saw is a neurodivergent person who was misunderstood and misclassified, falsely accused, who really was a hero, who lived and died to protect and serve, but he was misunderstood by those around him.
He was a victim of the times this happened in. He was a victim of the timing too.
All right. Well, you guys, thank you for joining us for another episode of Home Cinema Clues. Join us again. Dave's going to be a recurring agent, and I can't wait to see what he cooks up for us next to discuss. And we'll see you next time.